Chapter 612 Pressure. Ellison was silent, and didn't say anything at all. In his heart, he was even a little in awe of the Dalu Empire's emperor. He was very clear. He was right. Given the current circumstances, even Ellison couldn't do anything, even though he was an ultimate Douluo. The city's fate was sealed, and couldn't be reversed. Daihao was a hero, but he was born in the wrong time. He couldn't fully unleash his abilities as a commander, as he was suppressed by Soul Tool technology. He could only watch as the Sun Moon Empire suppressed the Dalu Empire through their absolute advantage in terms of Soul Tool technology. Although the Tang Sect and Sun Zuen were in Shrek City, Sun Zuen was only one man. How could he challenge an entire empire and its thousands of years of history? He had also grown much older over the past few years. Even though he was already a titled Douluo, he was simply drained too much every day. The Tang Sect's Soul Tool technology had been growing. It was already close to mainstream Soul Tool technology. However, whether it was in terms of resources, production ability, scale or research capabilities, it was still inferior to the Sun Moon Empire. These were irreversible. Should I really let the Sun Moon Empire rule the continent? Ellison shut his eyes painfully. Although the Sun Moon Empire didn't attack Shrek City eventually, there still seemed to be a huge rock on Elderson's chest. Your Majesty, I'll leave first. I'll serve you in my next life. One official turned around and left. Tears were streaming down his face. One person was fine. However, there couldn't just be one official standing here. If they didn't think for themselves, they still had to think for their families. With the first came the second. In just a little while, more than half the court was already gone. Shu Jiawei laughed mockingly and slowly came in front of Elderson. Elderson. He bent down and bowed to Elderson. Elderson raised his hands and lifted him up with gentle soul power. At the same time, Shu Jiawei also stood up. It wasn't just his respect for an emperor, it was his respect for an emperor who treasured life. Your Majesty. Shu Jiawei sighed and said, I represent the Daluo Empire. Thank you, Shrek Academy. Thank you, Tang Sect. Without both of you, the Daluo Empire would have been destroyed. Thanks. However, things have finally come to an end. Elderson, you and the others from the Academy and the Sect should leave too. After all, the Academy is independent. It doesn't belong to any empire. You've already gone to such lengths for the Daluo Empire. We are grateful for that, but you can't continue. It might enrage the Sun Moon Empire. The Daluo Empire can die, but Shrek Academy can't. Shrek is where the true legacy of the Douluo Empires lie. Elderson furrowed his brow and sighed heavily. He knew Shu Jiawei was right. Just like the officials who had left, Elderson could ignore his own plight, but he was still the master of the Sea God's Pavilion. He had to think for the million people in Shrek City. Moreover, there were still troops from the Doling Empire in Shrek City. The remaining royal family members of the Doling Empire were all in Shrek. Your Majesty, even though Shrek isn't capable of protecting the Daluo Empire, we can still lead the royal family back to Shrek if you are willing to do so. You can find an opportunity to rise again in the future. How about that? Shu Jiawei laughed and shook his head. He replied, no. The Sun Moon Empire has occupied too much land. Shrek City is only a city. If the Empire wants to exert pressure, it doesn't even need to attack. It just has to cut off all supply routes, so that Shrek City becomes helpless. Elderson, let me give you a word of advice. After you return, ask the Doling and Heavenly Soul Empire's royal families to dismiss their troops. In that way, Shrek can still survive. Otherwise, even Shrek City can't protect them. After he finished speaking, Shu Jiawei suddenly kneeled down in front of Elderson. Your Majesty, what are you doing? Elderson gave way and was astonished as he looked at the Emperor. From his earlier words, Elderson could tell that he was superior to the Emperors of both the Heavenly Soul and Doling Empires. This was probably also why the Daluo Empire was the last to be destroyed. Elderson, I have a request. Shu Jiawei could no longer call himself the Emperor now. As he said this, not only was his expression serious, but it was also filled with an indescribable sense of persistence. Your Majesty, please tell me. Elderson replied respectfully. Shu Jiawei said, after the Sun Moon Empire conquers the continent and changes it to the Sun Moon continent, I hope that you plan to seek revenge for the three empires of the original Douluo continent. In the future, our future generations will change the name back one day. When he said this, everyone's expressions changed. The name of the Douluo continent had already been around for thousands of years. Was it really going to change now? The few officials that had walked out of the hall stopped in their tracks. They unwittingly clenched their fists. Elderson's body shook. His eyes brightened. If the Sun Moon Empire really changes the name of the continent, I swear that I'll make sure the Sun Moon Empire's royal lineage will never carry on. This is even if it catalyzes widespread chaos. The name of the Douluo continent had been around for thousands of years. It carried the desire of every soul master too. How could it be tarnished just like this? An empire could fall, but the name of the continent must never change. Suddenly, the crowd in the hall were all very agitated. They all kneeled down in front of Elderson. At this moment, a majestic voice sounded. Message from the War God Empress. Hand over the White Tiger Duke in 3 days. The Daluo Empire can surrender, and deaths can be avoided. No looting will occur, no invasion will be carried out, and everything will remain as it is in Daluo City. Otherwise, I'll wreak havoc. When she mentioned the words wreak havoc, huge sound waves shook the entire city. The city could surrender only if the White Tiger Duke was surrendered. Why was this the condition? Even though the White Tiger Duke had been fighting the Sun Moon Empire these past few years, did they really have to fear him considering the absolute advantage they possessed? Report. A messenger ran in from the outside. Your Majesty, Daluo City has been surrounded, and the northern and southern city gates have been sealed. The officials and their families who planned to defect to the Sun Moon Empire, as well as civilians, were all chased back into the city. No surrender is allowed. No one is allowed to leave the city. When they heard these words, everyone around was horrified. Surrendering wasn't even an option. The White Tiger Duke gritted his teeth until they almost broke. He clenched his fists tightly. Bastard. Shu Jiawei's facial muscles were also contorting. No matter what, he hadn't expected to be in such a state. He couldn't even surrender. Sound waves were heard once again, just like before, through the sound amplifiers carried by surveillance soul tools. All of Daluo City could hear this voice. Your Majesty. The White Tiger Duke kneeled on one knee. Please allow me to fight them myself. I won't surrender, but I'm willing to fight until I die. Nonsense. Shu Jiawei shouted at the top of his voice. You are a loyal official of this court. Without you, this empire will cease to exist. I can hand myself over, but I won't hand you over. Perhaps we aren't doomed yet. At this moment, a slightly low-pitched and hoarse voice sounded. What? Shu Jiawei subconsciously turned back. Someone walked out from the crowd behind Elderson. When he walked out, both Shu Jiawei and the White Tiger Duke were stunned. They wouldn't be very bothered if it was someone else who said those words earlier. However, because it came from this person, it felt as if they had a glimmer of hope. Hallmaster Sun, what good idea do you have? Shu Jiawei asked anxiously. Yes, the person who had walked out from the crowd was the hallmaster of the Tang Sect Soul Tool Hall. Sun Zuen looked much more elderly than before. He had been tirelessly researching over the past few years, but he was rarely involved with Soul Tool production now, especially over the past year or so. He was researching almost day in and day out. He only left his laboratory after the Daluo Empire came under serious threat. He also brought the elites from the Soul Tool Hall out with him. However, he didn't cease his research, but no one knew what he had been researching. Sun Zuen was abnormally red. However, there was an excited look in his eyes. He said, let those who have left leave. It's best to let go of the officials who can't weather the storm with you. Your Majesty, my research has succeeded. The Sun Moon Empire won't be able to take advantage so easily. What? The White Tiger Duke immediately stood up. His eyes brightened. There was a look of desire as he stared at Sun Zuen. He knew that this was perhaps the last hope for the Daluo Empire. Sun Moon Empire base. Juzi was wearing fiery red armor and standing silently in front of the commander's tent. She was looking at the Daluo City's walls. 3 years had passed. Time didn't have any effect on her. She was still as beautiful as ever. The last ultimatum has been issued. I'm only waiting for their reply now. From the current situation in the Daluo Empire, they have no choice. The White Tiger Duke will most certainly surrender, given how loyal he is. In this way, I can kill fewer people when the city surrenders. In that case, as she thought until here, Juzi's body shuddered. An indescribable fear spread in her heart. She couldn't help but sigh. It's been 3 years. He has indeed not returned. However, I still feel very terrified when I think of him as I take down cities. Everything was about to be over. Once Daluo City surrendered, the last remaining empire in the Douluo continent would fall into her hands. Once she occupied the Daluo Empire, her mission would be done. The entire continent would be unified. When that happened, even if he returned, at most she would lose her life to him. When she thought until here, Juzi revealed a melancholic look in her eyes. Yuao, did you know? I fear your return, but I also hope for you to return. Are you fine? 3 days later, the Sun Moon Empire commander's tent. Has there been no response from Daluo City? Juzi sat in her seat and appeared almighty. No. The general who was kneeling in front of her answered respectfully. Over the past 3 years of war, Juzi's authority only became stronger and stronger. The entire Sun Moon Empire, whether it was civilians, scholars or officials, were all in admiration of the war god empress. Under her rule, the Sun Moon Empire became very stable. Everything was in order, and the military was extremely effective. Most of the Douluo and Dalu empires had become part of the Sun Moon Empire. Juzi slowly stood up, and a cold look flashed across her eyes. Wow, this white tiger duke is impressive. I've judged you wrongly. Send my order. Assault from the northern city gates. I really want to see what they use to resist the onslaught of my army. Yes, everyone shouted in unison. They were all excited. They were already out of patience. This was a good opportunity for them to achieve their goal. Daluo City was just a slaughterhouse in their eyes. The military signal echoed. A deep humming sound resonated across all of Daluo City. The Sun Moon Empire's 10+ Soul Engineer legions attacked at the same time. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion led the charge. The 5 Soul Engineer legions in the hand that protects the nation rose into the sky. They formed a neat formation in the sky, coldly watching Daluo City. On the ground, the various Soul Engineer legions were also prepared to unleash an all-out attack. All types of linked soul tools had already started to circulate soul power. In other words, they were ready for a linked attack. After all the changes over the past few years, there was no longer any need to use ordinary soldiers at the front line anymore. Cities were nothing in front of powerful soul tools. This was even applicable for a city like Daluo City. No matter how tough and resilient it was, how could it possibly resist an attack from linked soul tools? At the top of Daluo City's walls, soul tools were seen charging. The top and bottom of the city walls were quickly filled with Juga divine crossbow cannons and various other types of soul tools. The 3 Soul Engineer legions from Shrek were ready to attack. The heavy artillery engineer legion now had more than 500 Juga divine crossbow cannons. It was also the main force resisting the Sun Moon Empire during the war. If not for the heavy artillery, they would have long since caved in. The linked defensive barriers in Daluo City were also ready to be activated. In terms of soul tool technology, the Daluo Empire was undoubtedly inferior to the Sun Moon Empire by a lot. However, when it came to the number of soul masters, the Daluo Empire had the advantage. Its advantage was even very large. It wasn't just the soul masters of the Daluo Empire that were gathered here. There were also some soul masters from the Heavenly Soul and Doling empires. Among the soul masters from the 2 empires, there was indeed a portion of them who had defected to the Sun Moon Empire. However, more of them ran to the Daluo Empire, the only remaining haven in the Douluo continent. As a result, the linked defensive barriers could be supported. This was also why Daluo City could hang on until now. Of course, this was also because the Sun Moon Empire's high-energy compressive array soul tools needed more time to be charged. Although light was unlimited, absorbing, transforming, filtering and compressing it required a long process. This was especially so because this technology was new. The various soul engineer legions in the Sun Moon Empire were already very experienced. Just as they closed in, balls of intense light were already starting to form in the sky. Daluo City felt a little silent and lonely now. To the Sun Moon Empire's army, it was the city's last struggle, but it was a futile one. All 5 soul engineer legions of the hand that protects the nation were high up in the sky. They were divided into 5 regions. They were usually not needed for the first strike. Their main purpose was to monitor the entire battlefield, and their role was to replenish a sector whenever there was a shortfall. Juzi was inside the commander's tent. There were different types of soul tools at the side of the tent. These soul tool screens were connected to various aerial surveillance soul tools, broadcasting the live situation on the battlefield. Juzi was thus able to analyze the fight and deploy her troops better. Weird. Why has the city not attacked using stationary shells, given how close we are? Juzi was a little puzzled as she muttered. Juga divine crossbow cannons were the most important weapons to Daluo City. They fired stationary shells. Their greatest advantage was their effective range. Because of this advantage, the gap between the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineer legions and Daluo City was controlled. While linked attacks were very strong, their effective range was not as far compared to stationary soul cannons. Even high-energy compressive array soul tools were not as impressive. After all, these technologies were only developed in recent years and had not been perfected yet. Right now, the various soul engineer legions were already around 2.5 kilometers from Daluo City. This was the best distance for stationary soul cannons. At the same time, it was also the maximum distance linked attacks would travel. The closer the soul engineer legions got, the more powerful their linked attacks would be. At this moment, the situation changed. Balls of dark green light rose into the sky from Daluo City. After they rose into the air, they shone with a jade green glow. There were not many balls of light, only slightly more than 10. They were also greatly scattered, and their soul power undulations weren't very strong. The strength of soul power undulations was determined by oscillation detectors. No matter how strong the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineer legions were, it was still very dangerous for them to face Class 9 soul tools. This was why the various soul engineer legions immediately intercepted from afar using their linked soul tools the moment the oscillation detectors determined whether they were Class 9 soul tools. Their strength was restrained as much as possible. In the previous fights, the advantage of these Class 9 soul tools had been properly demonstrated. However, it seemed to be different this time. The soul power undulations that came from those glowing balls weren't too strong. The strongest ones only came from Class 7 stationary soul cannons. Given the tier of this lineup of offensive soul tools, even the most ordinary of soul engineer legions could rely on their linked defensive barriers for protection. The linked defensive soul tools had already finished charging. The soul engineer legions were waiting to deal Daluo City a heavy blow. After making a judgment, the various soul engineer legion commanders naturally gave the order not to intercept. They only opened up their defensive barriers. This was already enough for them. However, Juzi seemed to sense something. She suddenly shouted, "Quick, give the order to intercept." She only managed to say this much before she turned much more serious as she looked at the screens in front of her. This was because her order came too late. Those balls of jade green light exploded the moment they got close to the various soul engineer legions. Green light scattered in the air. After this, Juzi was astonished to find that the several screens in front of her started to show distorted images. What was going on? Juzi was astonished. The rest of the generals were also stunned. This was their first time seeing something like this. The soul engineer legions on the battlefield were even more astonished. As the jade green lights shone in the sky, the defensive barriers erected by the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineer legions were quickly dismantled. The linked attacks that they accumulated earlier were jumbled up. Streaks of light rose into the sky, but they were very chaotic. They were still not at an optimal distance to attack yet. Even if they fired 1 or 2 attacks, they couldn't pose any threat. When these linked attacks were jumbled up, the soul engineer legions were shocked to find that they could no longer form any linked attacks or defenses. Suddenly, the normally formidable Sun Moon Empire soul engineer legions were confused. Sun Zwen was standing arrogantly at the top of the city walls. There was a cold grin on his face. Linked soul tools are special because they are linked. Soul tools with similar frequencies are linked to attack or defend. However, what if I disrupt the frequencies? What if everything becomes messy? I would like to see if you can still unleash linked attacks or defenses. This was your greatest advantage, and you are about to lose it. Yes, this was Sun Zwen's newest research. It was something that was capable of changing the outcome of a war. As the hallmaster of the Tang Clan Soul Tool Hall and the strongest Class 9 soul engineer on the Douluo continent, Sun Zwen was well aware that he could not compare to the Sun Moon Empire. Under such a circumstance, how was the situation supposed to be changed? He was looking in this direction. The Sun Moon Empire's greatest advantage came from linked soul tools. Once they were linked and there were sufficiently strong soul engineer legions operating them, they weren't even afraid of ultimate Douluo. However, what would happen if there was no link? Could these soul engineers pull their strength? Their fighting strength would fall significantly. A soul engineer, unless he was Class 9, couldn't possibly fight a titled Douluo. The Sun Moon Empire had quite a number of Class 9 soul engineers. However, this number was still smaller than the number of titled Douluo in the 3 empires. Furthermore, without any linked attacks or defenses, the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineer legions were no longer invincible. Because of this, Sun Zwen had decided to research the destruction of linked soul tools. He had finally succeeded not long ago, and even turned his idea into reality. All the advanced tier soul engineers in the Tang Sect were now involved in the production of such special soul tools. He had decided to call them stationary interference shells. It possessed the long-range characteristic of stationary shells. At the same time, it could cover a huge region and last for a long time. Stationary interference shells were all-round devices. They generated strong yet chaotic undulations which were sufficient to interfere with the aerial surveillance soul tools of the Sun Moon Empire. Most importantly, all linked soul tools would be disrupted through the undulations that were generated. The only thing that Sun Zwen was regretful about was that his research had come too late. If he had succeeded when the war had just begun, the Sun Moon Empire would not have destroyed the Heavenly Soul and Doling empires. empires. With the fighting strength of the Soul Master armies of the three empires, they would have been able to restrain the Soul Engineers. It was war-defining research. Linked Soul tools were weak in the face of stationary interference shells. Of course, the Sun Moon Empire might be able to come up with interference-resistant Soul tools in the future, if given enough time. However, that wasn't something that could be completed in a day or two. Interfering was easy. Resisting the interference was much more difficult. Fire. The White Tiger Duke had not been so excited for a long time. When he saw the linked attacks being fired in all directions, and that chaos had descended upon the Soul Engineer legions, he grew excited. All this while, the Douluo Empire had been under the restraint of the Sun Moon Empire. As Marshal of the army, he felt helpless because of this. Today, he finally got to raise his fist because of this stationary interference shell. He could finally combat his enemies. Beams of light rose from Douluo City. There were more than 10 of them, and they were all headed towards the Sun Moon Empire's Soul Engineer legions. Every beam of glaring light was very powerful. Almost every Soul Engineer legion had to face the attack of one such beam of light. All the aerial surveillance Soul tools were a mess now. This was why they couldn't possibly judge how strong these beams of light were. The Douluo Empire's counterattack had finally begun. These beams of light were the last remaining Class 9 stationary shells that were left in Shrek City. The Douluo Empire and the Doling Empire. The White Tiger Duke had decided to use his last trump card in this first wave of attack. He had no choice. The stationary interference shells would be very effective at the start. This time was also when the Sun Moon Empire's army was at its messiest. Class 9 stationary shells were able to unleash their greatest strength without any linked defenses around. If they succeeded, the entire situation of the war would change. Juzi had already rushed out from her tent by now. With the help of her guards and advanced tier Soul Engineers, she quickly rose into the sky. She watched as the glaring lights shot towards them. It was too late to stop them now. She couldn't even use sound transmission Soul tools to give orders to the Soul Engineer legions. Right now, she was even panicking. Although she was always one to stay composed, she hadn't expected the Douluo Empire to come up with such a powerful Soul tool to interfere with the linked and surveillance Soul tools. She was a little frantic. Now, the Sun Moon Empire could only rely on the responses of their various Soul Engineer legions. After all, the Sun Moon Empire had a strong foundation. The strength of Soul tools and the command abilities of the various legion commanders had been well demonstrated within the short amount of time they had. First, the 5 Soul Engineer legions of the hand that protects the nation made a move. Beams of light fired from the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion. These beams of lights were indeed not a part of any linked attack. However, they still congregated together in the air and transformed into an attack. They weren't a linked attack, but the beams of light were still very close to one another as they fired at the Class 9 shell coming towards them. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer was undoubtedly one of the strongest forces in the world now. Every Soul Engineer had a cultivation equivalent to a Class 8 Soul Engineer, and they were strengthened by human-shaped Soul tools. Although there were only 300 of them, their combined attack still managed to detonate the Class 9 shell. At the same time, these Soul Engineers all activated their individual protective barriers. They let the shockwaves hit them and remained firm in their positions. The other 4 Beast Lord rank Soul Engineer legions used the same method. They were all located in different directions, and were each facing a Class 9 shell too. The Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion managed to successfully down one Class 9 shell. However, their overall abilities were still rather inferior compared to the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion. Some of the Soul Engineers were flung away from the resulting shockwaves. Close to 100 people fell from the sky. These people had been all standing at the front of the Soul Engineer Legion. The Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion fared about as well as the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. They had always been known for their defense. About 50 or 60 of them fell from the sky, but the Evil Eye Tyrant and Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legions were in a worse state. The Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion was known for their speed. Furthermore, it was once battered by Huo Yuao and Tang Wutong. Although their members were quickly replaced, the new members weren't as good as the ones before. The Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion was in a similar situation as the Evil Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion. It was under the command of the royal family. After Juzi gained authority, she suppressed the royal family, along with the huge losses sustained by the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion many years ago, as well as the death of their legion commander. It was no longer as strong as it had been. This was why both Soul Engineer legions suffered heavily as they were caught off guard. Only a third of their Soul Engineers survived. The situation on the ground was even more tragic. The ordinary Soul Engineers were much weaker compared to those from the hand that protects the nation. Even though some of them tried to resist, it was very difficult for them to aim under the effect of the stationary interference shells. Balls of glaring light blew apart in the air. A terrifying energy storm instantly raged. However, just as this round of explosions detonated, 8 beams of light also shot from afar. They formed a barrier in the air that managed to protect some of the Soul Engineers. Stationary interference shells could disrupt linked Soul tools, but they couldn't affect the attack and defense of a single Soul tool. These 8 beams of light came from the high-energy compression array Soul tools that the Sun Moon Empire's army had brought. These Soul tools were directly operated by Kong Denning. Once he discovered the frightening effects of the stationary interference shells, he immediately reacted. Although he couldn't determine their exact positions through the aerial surveillance Soul tools, he relied on his own experience and memory to quickly fire the compression array Soul tools. They were capable of attacking and defending, and he now used them to defend. This was because any attack would be futile right now, since Douluo City was still far away. Intercepting the stationary shells required accuracy, but the aerial surveillance Soul tools weren't working. As a result, using the compression array Soul tools to defend now was the best option. Kong Denning's timely use of the Soul tools was a blessing for the Sun Moon Empire. Terrifying explosions shook the entire sky. Lights of different colors flashed all around Douluo City. The booms that resonated caused the soldiers to temporarily lose their hearing. Even the sky was painted with all types of colors as the sunlight dimmed. This series of explosions lasted for 15 minutes before they slowly stopped. Ever since this war had started, this was probably the most intense moment. More than a dozen Class 9 stationary shells had been fired at the same time. How terrifying was that? Even the Sun Moon Empire couldn't afford to attack so luxuriously. The battlefield became clear again after 15 minutes. The defensive strength of the compression array Soul tools was rather impressive. Although the protective barriers didn't completely shield the Soul Engineers in the face of so many Class 9 shells, they still helped to a large extent. 4 protective barriers were left intact. The other 4 were completely crushed. On the ground, 5 out of the original 12 Soul Engineer legions had been wiped out. The other 7 Soul Engineer legions had also sustained heavy losses. This round of attacks had caused the Sun Moon Empire's Soul Engineer legions to lose a third of their fighting strength. This was the heaviest loss they had sustained since the war had begun. Juzi clenched her fists tightly as she drifted in midair. Even when the energy storm was at its most intense, she didn't descend to avoid it. She hadn't expected something like this at all. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.